One thing that I got throughout my walk was the overwhelming feeling of sadness and despair because of the deaths over the years. And I got that people did die when it was a park. I got that 2 deaths specifically I thought happened in the 60s. Frankly, I was like, who would build this here? Like, the energy is not good.
Funny, because when I showed up here, I was like, who the hell would build this place in the middle of nowhere? When this was an amusement park, it was called Lake Shawnee, and it was built by a guy named Conley Snido back in 1926. Now, I got a photo here of what it looked like when it was pretty much in its heyday as an amusement park. Now, you said you got a couple of deaths in the 60s. Well, get this. Back in June of 1961, a 6-year-old boy named Wayne Harmon drowned in that pond right over here. There's an article on it. Then in July of 1966, an 11-year-old boy named John Richard Tolley drowned in the same pond. Now, the guilt was so much for Snido that he ended up closing his place for good at the end of that summer. Now, I almost never ask experts if they've had experiences, but the historian I spoke to used to come here when she was a kid and swim in the pond. Until one time, she felt like somebody grabbed her foot inside the pond and pulled her down. Now, she almost drowned, but she's totally convinced to this day that it was a paranormal event.
Interesting.
I think now's probably a good time to tell Amy why this property is so important to the family.
It meant the world.
Now, Chris's father, Jules' husband, bought the property in 1985.
His dream was to own it and restore it, but nothing worked right. And so finally, we just had to kind of give up.
Now, would you mind telling Amy about how the husband passed?
It ended up being colon cancer.
And when he passed, he was still living here.
Right.
Chris, you trying to preserve your father's dream.
Yes. I think our intentions is to preserve the property just the way it is.
So I know that you guys have paranormal investigators and all of this kind of thing.
We do.
Anything else?
I ran into a deceased female, and I would have put her between 14 and 16 years of age. She seemed to be from a while ago. There was a male that she runs into, and I think that this male killed her.
Now, I think you're describing the murder I came across in my research. Now, the killer was a local guy named James Belcher, who was 25 years old. His grandparents actually owned this property in the early 1900s. Belcher was separated from his wife and had a mistress by the name of Myrtle Taylor. She was only 19 years old. And on May 11, 1935, Belcher walked into a restaurant and sees her with another guy having dinner. Well, he freaks out, and he basically kidnaps her and forces her into the car. Now, what he does is pulls over right on the road right here. Belcher grabs a gun and shoots her twice in the head.
Holy.
I actually have a photo of both of them. Is it possible that's who you saw?
I had a sketch done of the girl I saw.
I mean, the nose, the eyes.
I mean, the photo's not great, but it's very possible this is the same girl.
Mm-hmm.
Looks exactly alike.
So, Mom, you think it could be the same girl?
I do.
You can see it, yeah.
The mouth to me.
Another thing that I saw was very disturbing, and it took place a long time ago, and it was near a covered wagon. Everybody's happy, there's kids, they built a bonfire, singing and dancing, have a good old time. And then I'm hearing screaming and yelling, and I got that it was like really awful murders. And I think it was safe to assume that Native Americans had committed this attack on what looked like a white family. I knew that these people had been caught off guard. They totally did not expect this to happen. There was a thing about the Native Americans being all pissed off because they felt this was sacred land.
Do you have a time frame?
The 1750s or 60s.
Wow. I think I know exactly what you're talking about, or what you saw. This property is the site of the most brutal Indian attack in the history of this area. In 1774, a guy named Mitchell Clay bought over 800 acres and moved onto the property here with his wife, Phoebe, and 14 kids. Now, they were the first white settlers in this part of the country. I got a picture of the house they lived in, actually. Now, in 1783, Clay went hunting with his 2 oldest sons and left everybody else home. As soon as he left, a group of Shawnee Indians stormed the property. First, they shot and killed Clay's 17-year-old son, Bartley. Then they slashed their teenage daughter, Tabitha, to death. Then they scalped both these kids, and then kidnapped their 16-year-old brother, Ezekiel, and took him to Ohio. When Clay found out about this, he rounded up a posse, and he went to Ohio to try to save his son. But by the time he got there, it was too late. Ezekiel had been tortured and burned at the stake.
Oh.
Now, you mentioned the attack we saw was retaliation for the land. The expert I spoke to told me that the Shawnee Indians didn't actually live here when the attack happened, but they did have a settlement here way back in the 1400s. In fact, back in 1989, Chris's family was excavating land here, and they uncovered human remains that belonged to those Indians. They found more than 20 bodies, 13 of which were kids. Now, there's a good reason to believe that there were more bodies still here. I actually have a photo of one of the remains they uncovered.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe that something like this happened on this piece of land. Maybe it is an amusement park for the dead.
So now, are these Native Americans still here?
Yes. They're upset and active. They didn't want us here doing the investigation. Possibly at times they would make the living here feel intimidated and nervous. Unfortunately, one of the things that they were indicating that they've resorted to is making the living sick here, putting emotions onto the living people, trying to get the living to hurt one another and causing accidents. And one of the things that I got was that a male associated with the property was having a heart attack or heart issues.
I was hoping we wouldn't have to talk about this. But Jewel, can you tell Amy about your son?
He had 26 heart attacks before he passed away with a massive heart attack.
He was, what, 51?
Mm-hmm.
And he lived on the property at the time?
Yes.
Wow.
I actually have a photo of our son that they provided me with.
Wow. Okay. I saw him during my walk.
Does it make you happy or kind of sad?
Makes me, I'm okay with it.
I think he's here protecting my mother.
All right, so what else?
Well, then I went over to the house.
And that's where you live, Jewel.
Yes.
I got that the Native Americans are very active there, and because of that, I think that there would be experiences sometimes. I got that they can show themselves and interact with their surroundings. I did see something being moved around in the house.
Tell Amy what goes on.
Sometimes I'll lay something down and go to another room, and when I come back, it's in a different place. Sometimes it's gone, and then a couple of days it shows back up.
Now, you had told me you saw an apparition of a Native American warrior.
Yes. He had no clothes. He was holding something in his hand.
The big question, I think, is what do these Indians want from these guys?
So basically, the Native Americans believe that this is their land, and they want it back. And they don't want anybody here. Their goal is to get them off this land.